5:30 to 8:30 for Metro Morning on CBC Radio 1.
NATO defense ministers, including Canada's Anita Anand, have been meeting in Brussels today to talk about Russia's war in Ukraine and what the alliance calls a defining moment of our security. NATO defense ministers have been talking about bolstering the alliance's eastern flanks. Andrew Rasoulis is a fellow at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute. He's in Ottawa. Andrew, good afternoon to you, and tell me more about these high-level meetings and who's there.
Good afternoon, Jill. Thank you. Yes, so NATO defense ministers met in an extraordinary meeting today in Brussels to address the extremely serious situation facing NATO and its eastern flank in terms of the war that's occurring between Russia and Ukraine. This was demonstrated particularly alarmingly on Sunday when Russian cruise missiles were fired at a Ukrainian base called Waterloo, which is 25 kilometers away from the Polish border, and Poland is a member of NATO. So what we have is actually live fire in relationship to the ongoing war landing on NATO's doorstep. So NATO, which does have forces in the area, Canada has it in Latvia as part of that forward area, but now NATO has realized that it really has to take a strategic look at how strong it wants to make its eastern flank in light of this war. And so the ministers have met. They have confirmed and given direction to the military staffs of NATO to formulate an enhanced strengthening of the eastern flank in terms of the forces that would be required and the resources that would have to be committed. And this will be reconfirmed in terms of the heads of government meeting, which the Prime Minister will be attending with President Biden on the 24th of March in Brussels, when they will reconfirm all this.
And I understand part of this discussion is about something called Article 5. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has said Article 5 of the NATO agreement is ironclad. What is Article 5? What does that mean?
Yeah, so Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, which is what essentially forms the NATO alliance, stipulates that an attack on one member of the alliance is equivalent to the attack on all members of the alliance. So that means that all members of the alliance must come to the assistance of the ally that is under attack. Now, each state will decide in its own way how it wishes to respond to that attack, but there is an obligation by treaty to come to the assistance of that state.
Okay, so yeah, sort of reaffirming that is ironclad. In the meantime, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy gave a virtual address to Canada's Parliament yesterday, another to U.S. Congress today, in both cases asking for a no-fly zone. NATO has previously said no, that they will not invoke or enforce a no-fly zone. What is the current thinking on that? What is NATO's response to that idea?
Yeah, so NATO once again today reaffirmed that they cannot implement a no-fly zone over Ukraine because that is a hostile combat environment. In order to do that, they would have to enforce their declaration through a war, essentially a combat operation against the Russian air capabilities to establish, in effect, air supremacy over the war area of Ukraine. That means, in effect, the president has stated this clearly, the Third World War, and all that implies. So consequently, it is a wholly impractical undertaking by NATO to impose a no-fly zone unless it chooses to go to a war with Russia, but it's not obliged to do that since Ukraine is not a member of NATO. Attacking a member of NATO, the Baltic states, Poland, Romania, which is in the area, that would trigger the full NATO response.
And President Zelenskyy has said, he made headlines yesterday, recognizing that Ukraine will never join NATO. Can you explain on that and the significance of that?
It's extremely significant. The Ukrainian aspiration to join NATO is what is in effect the cause of this war. To really make it a short thing, the Russians have totally opposed that. they have said that this would be an existential threat to Russia if Ukraine joined NATO, and the persistence of Ukraine to seek membership after 8 years of negotiations of something called the Minsk Agreement, which stopped the fighting in 2015, caused the Russians to become very frustrated, Putin in particular, and he went to war to prevent this. The war has now bogged down into a war of attrition. Neither side can dislodge the other. And so now they're looking at a political solution, and the essence of the political solution is this question of Ukraine's neutrality, essentially not going into NATO.
So, and there are those who are interpreting that declaration by President Zelenskyy, sort of surrendering the possibility or the notion of ever having Ukraine join NATO, that could be the beginning, perhaps, of a pathway to peace.
Yes, this is the major breakthrough, because they've had about 5 meetings between Ukrainian and Russian delegations at peace talks, and they have been able to thus far only hammer out, very important though, the humanitarian corridors and limited ceasefires around those corridors, but they were not able to move on the political settlement of the war, which at its heart is this issue of Ukrainian neutrality. By having moved in this direction today, in fact, the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov has acknowledged, saying now we can actually speak in a what he called business-like manner. We can actually make progress, and the Ukrainians have also said that the Russians are now sounding like they mean serious business in terms of a negotiated compromise.
So what is the significance, do you think? I mean, you mentioned that Prime Minister Trudeau will be, I know U.S. President Biden as well, will be in Brussels in the coming days for further NATO meetings. What will they be talking about? What will be the path, perhaps, to pursuing that negotiated peace?
Exactly. So they will be doing both the deterrent side, affirming the decisions taken today by defense ministers to enhance NATO's Article 5 commitments and force postures. And they will also then be looking at the diplomatic side, the path of diplomacy, which by next week we will have seen hopefully more progress on these bilateral negotiations between the Russians and the Ukrainians. And NATO will be involved in some macro way of actually perhaps guaranteeing Ukraine's neutrality. These are things that are being discussed right now, because the Ukrainian neutrality, the Ukrainians are insisting on security guarantees for that, and the Russians are acknowledging that. So NATO will be playing a role, in addition to larger issues, things like China's playing a mediatory role, Turkey is involved, and Israel's involved. So there's a lot of diplomatic moving parts that the heads of government will be taking account and pulling together a cohesive NATO package for that.
Andrew, thank you for the conversation and explanation this afternoon.
You're very welcome, Jill. Thank you very much.
Andrew Rizzulis is a fellow with the Canadian Global Affairs Institute. He was in Ottawa. All right, the last word goes to Khalil.
And Jill, we're still looking at a couple of pretty big issues. North on the Don Valley Parkway approaching Lawrence, the city letting us know that a right lane is blocked off with a stalled vehicle. So having a look right now at volume from just north of Dundas, north of Girard, up towards Bloor, and that's going to be busy up to Lawrence. And on the 427 northbound, if you can avoid it at the moment, highly suggest you do so. Because at the 401, we have 2 left lanes taken out with a crash. It's going to be jammed pretty much from the Gardner and the QEW to the 401 because of this, and that's going to be mainly in the express lanes. And just also, we have a crash on the eastbound QEW through Appleby line. The HOV lane is taken out there, Jill.
Thanks, Khalil. It's 1 degree at the moment. 3 is the temperature we're headed to overnight tonight, and mainly cloudy skies. Those skies will clear by about midday tomorrow, and there's some sunshine in store, and a high tomorrow of 15 degrees. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I'm Jill Deacon. Thanks for listening to Here and Now.
Tomorrow on The Current.
Farmers are also affected by the sanctions against Russia, which are creating higher costs on everything from transportation to fertilizer.
We've seen the impact of war in Ukraine at the gas pumps. Now analysts are warning we'll soon see it at the supermarket as well. Before the conflict, the country was a major global supplier of wheat and oats. That's coming up on The Current.
The Current, tomorrow morning at 8:37, 9:07 in Newfoundland, and on the CBC
talking their way out amid reports that Russia and Ukraine may have sketched out the beginnings of a peace deal. We'll talk to a former NATO Deputy Secretary General about the prospects for a lasting peace.
President Biden, you are the leader of the nation. I wish you to be the leader of the world. Being the leader of the world means to be the leader of peace.
Volodymyr Zelenskyy speaking directly to U.S. politicians today. He also presented a wrenching video showing Ukraine before and after the attacks. Happy families juxtaposed with images of dead and dying children. Beautiful city streets, then buildings reduced to bombed out rubble. All designed to sway the U.S. to put even more pressure on Russia. Welcome to the World at 6. I'm Susan Bonner. Talks continue between Ukrainian and Russian officials. For a third day, that fact, a glimmer of hope. But even that hope is tempered by reality.
I mean, we will not feel safe because he was lying before the war started. He will not attack. Then he was lying that he will not kill civilian people. So whatever he promises next, I will not believe. And I hope nobody will believe because this is the person who is lying all the time.
There is economic news here in Canada as well. Inflation has hit a 30-year high, and Ottawa and Ontario pledge millions for hybrid vehicles. But we begin with the latest from inside Ukraine. While Russian and Ukrainian officials are sounding more optimistic about ceasefire negotiations, inside Ukraine, more carnage, more loss. Today, more horrific attacks on civilians. The number of dead still to be counted. Chris Brown reports from Ukraine.
In Chernihiv, a city north of Kyiv, people were queuing up outside a store to buy bread. Accounts differ about whether the civilians were hit by a Russian shell or shot to death, but video of the aftermath shows lifeless bodies on the ground. Russian officials say it's a hoax and claim their troops weren't there. But for the Russian forces attacking Ukraine, killing large numbers of civilians is horrifically not uncommon. Mariupol to the south, a siege has left thousands, perhaps even 20,000 dead, say civic leaders, requiring mass graves to bury the casualties. And tonight, a Russian bomb demolished a theater in the city where up to 1,000 people were sheltering in the basement. Amid such gruesomeness, it appears there has been progress towards a ceasefire. President Vladimir Zelenskyy said Ukraine wants a just peace with security guarantees. And Sergei Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister, speculated that Ukrainian neutrality might be acceptable. Russia has reportedly given Ukraine a 15-point proposal. But the final decision will be up to the man who launched the war, President Vladimir Putin. And his speech today was absolutely uncompromising. He repeated his usual lie that Russia's military never hits civilian targets. Russia's war has also been about destroying Ukraine's economy, and farmers in particular have paid a heavy price. In the east, Russian troops put mines in fields and have destroyed roads. We visited the farm of Yaroslav Protselo, an egg and wheat farmer near Lviv. He said diesel fuel for equipment is scarce, diverted to military needs, so is animal feed and seed for crops. Ukraine exports vast amounts of wheat, corn, and grains, and Andrei Zhidechek, who heads an agriculture cooperative, expects exports will disappear as food supplies get used by Ukrainians instead. Up to 50% of farmers will not be able to process their crops this year, he said. Photos of farmers towing captured Russian tanks have made them heroic figures here. But Ukraine's government is asking for more to get their crops in the ground this spring to avoid an economic collapse. Chris Brown, CBC News, near Lviv, Ukraine.
The Ukrainian president made an impassioned speech to the U.S. Congress begging Joe Biden to sanction every single Russian politician and to stop all U.S. companies from doing business in or with Russia. Volodymyr Zelenskyy stepped up his campaign for a no-fly zone, too. He didn't get everything he wanted from the Americans, but as Katie Simpson reports, he did not go away empty-handed.
President Volodymyr Zelenskyy took a deep breath and placed his hand on his chest as he watched members of Congress give him a standing ovation before his speech even began. His leadership has already won over hearts and minds in this powerful room, but there is a limit to their support, a limit he's desperately trying to eliminate.
In the darkest time for our country, for the whole Europe, I call on you to do more.
Speaking through an interpreter, Zelenskyy pleaded for more sanctions, more weapons, and his biggest ask, for the U.S. to back a no-fly zone. Arguing Russia has attacked democracy and shared values, he pointed to powerful moments in history when the U.S. and allies stood together to defend both.
Remember Pearl Harbor, when your sky was black from the planes attacking you. Remember September the 11th, when innocent people were attacked from air. Our country experienced the same every day.
Knowing his words alone may not be enough, Zelenskyy confronted his audience with the brutal reality his people face in the form of a video. Lawmakers wiped tears from their eyes as graphic images of explosions, the injured and dead, including children, were interspersed with scenes of Ukrainians living in peace before the war began. The montage, ending with the message in English, "Close the sky over Ukraine."
I'm addressing the President Biden. I wish you to be the leader of the world. Being the leader of the world means to be the leader of peace. Thank you. Global Green.
While Democrats and Republicans emerged from this moment united, that limit to their support remains unchanged.
I do not support a NATO no-fly zone.
Republican Senator Lindsey Graham agrees with the Biden administration that a no-fly zone would be a dangerous escalation because it would draw the U.S. and NATO countries into direct conflict with Russia.
We're going to give Ukraine the arms to fight and defend themselves through all the difficult days ahead.
President Joe Biden announced another $800 million in weapons for Ukraine and toughened his language on Vladimir Putin. Biden acknowledges the situation in Ukraine is desperate and that Zelenskyy makes a powerful argument. But it's not enough for Biden to risk expanding the war. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
NATO's defense ministers have decided to vastly expand their forces in Eastern Europe. There are currently around 40,000 troops near the Russian border. Commanders have been ordered to prepare plans for more, and NATO is considering establishing permanent bases. That would violate a 20-year-old agreement with Russia. But Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says Russia's attack on Ukraine has made that deal irrelevant.
That's exactly what we're now tasking the commanders to provide advice on, how to reset our deterrence and defense, and we will do what is necessary. The NATO-Russia founding treaty, of course, that actually has a clear reference to in the current security environment back in 1997. We are not in the current security environment today. We're in a total different security environment.
The proposal will be debated at a special NATO meeting next week. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will be one of the participants. The United Nations top court has ordered Russia to stop hostilities in Ukraine. Ukraine had asked the International Court of Justice for the order 2 weeks ago, arguing Russia was committing genocide.